Greetings. In this video lecture, I want to introduce you to our next text, What the Best College Students Do, and remind you of the importance of the C-TEQ technique that we first learned about at the beginning of the semester in our syllabus and my first web lectures about the readings for this class. And in particular, we're going to want to look at how does C-TEQ help us read Bain's text. So one of the things you might be wondering about is why shift here in the second half of the course to a book that seems like it's more about college than work. And I think that the reason I want to make this move is because Bain is actually very interested in people who are out in the work world pursuing their careers, who've been successful, who are happy, who are living creative, productive, engaged lives, and ask what did they do in college that set them up for this success. And so the kind of questions that emerge from this exploration start in the career world and then work back to college. And for us as college students, we get to ask questions like, what's the relationship between our education and our work after school's done? What's the connection between why we work and how we learn? And that's a really interesting question for Bain. And what's the connection between learning, work, and happiness? So this, in many ways, this text fits in beautifully at this point in the course and becomes the foundation for our third major writing project. Let's review C-TEQ really quickly and use that review of C-TEQ as a way of introducing you to some of the key claims and concepts that Bain is going to explore. So the C in C-TEQ stands for annotating your text in terms of looking for and making margin notes about and or underlinings related to key claims or concepts from a reading. Now, when we think about claims, there's two examples from this first 22 pages of Bain that jump out at me. The first is what I would argue is his thesis. He says, fundamentally, we want to promote deep, passionate, joyous, and creative learning. And the we there, I think he's referring to himself and his wife, who was the main researcher who helped him with the book. And so I think that's really the thesis of the text, that he's a great college professor himself who really enjoys learning and sees it as the key to a happy life. And he's trying to promote the idea that if we learn on a deeper, more passionate, creative level, we're going to have happier lives, and that the people who he most admires and people who he's discovered really doing amazing things in life have attitudes about learning that have set them up for that success. So that's his thesis, basically. Another example of a claim that he makes, as you will see, is about midway through. He starts pretty much arguing that grades actually don't tell us much about learning, which is not to say that grades aren't important, but it is to say that you can be an A student and really not learn anything at any kind of deeper level. And it's that deeper level that's going to open ways of thinking that will make your later life more exciting. At least that's Bain's take on it. Concepts. So here's a list of just say 4 concepts that pop up in this chapter and actually throughout the book. Deep learning, finding your passion, developing the power of the mind, and creativity being central to learning and working. Now remember, these are all Bain's claims or concepts, and as a critical reader, you are not obligated to accept them at all. But what you want to do is understand them. So as you're reading the text, you want to be annotating, making margin notes as you encounter these claims, circling some of these important words as they emerge, because eventually later I'm going to ask you to write a paper where you communicate your understanding of these claims and concepts and then evaluate and apply them to your own life. So you're going to be evaluating which of these ideas you think works and which do not, and using experiences from your own life and reading and knowledge, including from this course, to evaluate Bain's ideas. And so the first step to being able to successfully evaluate is to, one, be able to identify them. And that's what annotation is about. So as you see them, noting them. A second is you got to be able to retrieve them. You got to be able to go back and find them. And again, annotation helps there. And the third is then you got to understand it. And understanding comes from noting it when you first encounter it, thinking it more about it by annotating it, underlining it, putting notes in the margin, but also being able to go back later and find it and think more about it and work it through again. So annotation is pivotal and mirrors sort of the process of understanding, right? Identifying, retrieving, understanding. All right, let's move on to terms. Bain uses a lot of different terms in this text. In this chapter, three examples that jump out to me are the idea of the strategic grading game, intrinsic motivation, which means motivation that comes from within you, and extrinsic motivation, which is motivation that comes external to you, like grades, approval of professors, etc. Clearly, Bain is going to argue for intrinsic motivation and raise concerns about educational practices and attitudes like the strategic grading game and getting wrapped up in extrinsic motivation that distracts you from what you really want. Another term from our C-TEQ model. So we've done concepts and claims, we've done terms, and we've done examples, or now we're doing examples, is examples. And Bain organizes his chapters throughout the text around prominent examples. And a good list from this chapter of four that you should be looking for are Sherry Kafka, a classic example of a successful, accomplished, happy person that Bain wants to analyze for how they thought about their learning and their college experience. Paul Baker's Integrated Abilities class, a particular college class that Bain holds out as an example of something that really inspired people to get out of their boxes. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's a astronomist physicist, famous American astronomist physicist, and Bain returns to him as an example a couple times in the text, but he's one of the key people who's quoted, I think, twice in the first 22 pages. And then the force concept inventory, which is a little test that a group of physics professors used as a sort of pre and post test device with students they were teaching to see if they were achieving real deep learning and understanding of the material. Not surprisingly, in terms of making Bain's point, they weren't. But anyway, these are examples of Bain's use of examples. It's one of his primary techniques, is sort of case studies and important examples that demonstrate and support the claims he's making. And finally, quotes. Bain is a quote factory. You want to be underlining regularly. I usually underline one or two things a page as I go through this text. Try not to underline more than 10% of the text, because then you're basically rereading everything. But you do want to do some key underlining. And this quote that I have on the screen here to me is an example of a really cool Bain quote that gives us lots to think about, lots of material to play around with in our class, in our discussion forums, in our class discussions, and also in our papers. So I'll leave you with this quote, and I hope you'll leave it on the screen for a few minutes and think about it, because it really outlines the process Bain is calling us to engage in. So if the first quote that I presented on the first page of this PowerPoint was his thesis, arguing that he was trying to promote joyous, deep, creative learning, here is his three-sentence summary of how you get there. And it starts with understanding yourself, then a search for creative work that engages you, and finally, connecting this all to a passion. And so these ideas of understanding yourself, creativity, and passion, these are not the typical way we often think about the purpose of school and the purpose of our work, right? He's arguing from a particular philosophical stance that hopefully we can argue with and debate with and contextualize via the thinking we've already been doing in the class. Speaking of thinking, I'll see you out there in the class space, looking forward to reading and hearing your thoughts on this very engaging text.